Hello and welcome. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about survivor sources for incarcerated men. We're so glad you're here to learn with us. My name is Carla Vierteller, and I work for the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, a division of Respect Together. NSVRC is a nonprofit organization who does a lot of different things related to sexual violence. Our primary funding is from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to provide training and technical assistance to rape prevention education grantees and sub-grantees. But we also offer a range of resources. We host a National Sexual Assault Awareness Month campaign every April. We also have a library with the largest number of sexual assault resources in the world. Right now, I believe our collection has over 65,000 individual resources in a variety of different languages with anything related to sexual violence. We provide resources and information to anybody who needs anything. So we offer technical assistance through our website and through our email, which you'll see later on in the show, resources at nsvrc/respecttogether.org. So we're a great resource, and today we're going to be utilizing our Male Survivors Project to talk to you a little bit about this topic, but I want to introduce our partner in this project, JDI and Chris Mady. Chris?
Thanks so much, Carla. Yeah, my name is Chris Mady. I'm a program director with Just Attention International. And just a little bit about Just Attention International, or JDI for short. We're a health and human rights organization that seeks to end sexual abuse in all forms of detention. We really focus on carrying out our mission through working with corrections officials, rape crisis advocates, and policymakers to make detention facilities safe. We promote public attitudes that value the dignity and safety of people in detention. And we support incarcerated survivors of sexual abuse and sexual harassment. It's our fundamental belief that when the government takes away someone's freedom, it takes on an absolute responsibility to protect that person's safety. And that no matter what crime someone may have committed, rape is not part of the penalty.
Thank you so much, Chris. So we're going to start off by talking about men, and specifically men who are survivors of sexual violence. Because when we're talking about incarcerated men, we're talking about men. So there are a range of stereotypes and concerns that get in the way of rape crisis centers providing services to men. And we're going to talk about those, but just to sit and think about those on your own for a couple seconds before we jump into that. Okay, so there are a lot of stigma and socialization that impacts men and how they think about sexual violence, specifically how they think about becoming victims or being victims themselves. Men, and this is very general speak, but it does apply to men in this culture. And then there are certainly a lot of different men who experience different things. So often in our culture in the United States, men are socialized to suppress their emotion. Victimhood in general is seen as feminine. Men are taught not to be weak and are taught to show strength at all times. So showing emotions is considered showing weakness. Showing fear is considered showing weakness. And so a lot of times men who do experience sexual violence do not want to show those emotions or feelings and don't talk about victimization. But if they do talk about victimization, oftentimes they are met with those same stigmas and socialization pieces of, oh, men cannot be survivors of sexual assault. Specifically, if the perpetrator is a female, then men are kind of socialized to say, oh, well, you're supposed to want sex whenever you can have it. So a female wouldn't be a perpetrator. And then in the case if the perpetrator is a man, then oftentimes men question themselves and worry that others will question, oh, does that mean I'm gay? Or does that mean I'm bisexual? And so they start to question sexuality. So there's a range of impacts that sexual violence can have on men, but those are just some considerations. And then when we're talking about rape crisis centers, including dual programs and comprehensive victim service associations services, oftentimes people perceive those services to be for women. The majority of people that work at these programs are women. The majority of outreach language and imagery is of women. The YWCA is a large provider of rape crisis services across the country. And many programs were called Women's Resource Center or Women's Healing Space, which can feel very exclusionary for men. And then also going back to that imagery, even if your program doesn't have women in the name, much of the imagery tends to be of women. And this goes beyond men to different cultures and backgrounds, but it's really a goal of the victim service movement to really be more inclusive of different genders and different identities.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we always like to do at JDI is kind of highlight the work of folks that we are engaging with, the different folks in our programs and things like that. And I help facilitate a therapeutic art workshop in a men's prison. And one of the themes that we get to touch on is the judgments that people have of them and comparing those to the positive qualities and traits that the participants feel are true to who they really are. And I think that this particular piece that one of the participants I work with, his name is Jose, created just really helps highlight that. He wrote, that he's received all these negative messages that he was cold-hearted, unlovable, not caring, dangerous, irresponsible. A lot of those very same things that people have about stereotypes of men, especially about incarcerated men. But then when he was like, okay, who am I really? The things that came up for him were loving dad, caring, responsible, honest, helpful. And I think that those are complete opposites of each other, right? And so I think as we're thinking through what concerns and stereotypes are getting in the way of serving men, this helps highlight it so well for me, because this is an individual that was like, these are the stereotypes that affected me, and this is who I really am. So I think as we begin to think about men, and then we transition to thinking about especially incarcerated men, some of these stereotypes that's kind of what the shift we're having to make is like, okay, when we kind of get past that wall, when we get past kind of the barrier people put up or the stereotypes we have of people, who are they really and how can we serve them? Because we really can work and reach people on an emotional level, even for folks that we stereotypically don't think that we can. So I think it's actually a great opportunity for us to start thinking about like, okay, who are the people that really need our services and how can we support them? And in thinking about that, why this topic is so wonderful to me is, our whole project is about creating a space for men to feel like the services that are at your center are welcome to them, that are for them. And I think when we're thinking about how can we make our services more applicable to survivors who are men, we're also automatically then thinking about how can we make our organization more welcoming for incarcerated survivors as well. The reality is that men need services throughout their lifespan, that a lot of times criminal activity is a direct response to trauma, and that support that your agency can offer is helpful regardless of that, if that's before someone's incarceration, after someone's incarceration, during someone's incarceration. That again, this is just really a space. If we can create a space that's more welcoming to men, then we can start thinking too about how we can create spaces that are more welcoming to incarcerated folks as well. So I know that we just discussed some of the barriers that exist for us for working with men in general, but I just want folks to take a few moments as well to just think about what stereotypes and concerns are getting in the way of providing services to incarcerated people. And I think a lot of times these might be really similar to the things that you think of, or maybe that you already thought of when you're thinking about working with men. And so I just encourage you to just take a few moments to think about like what's getting in the way? Why is this feeling difficult? And it is hard. And I don't want to kind of take that away from this, because I think these are hard topics. These are historically groups of people that our centers haven't served. So just thinking about like, what can we do about that? What concerns are getting in our way? And I think for me, when thinking about incarcerated people, the number one thing that I hear from folks that I work with who are incarcerated is that they feel like they're seen as inhuman. And I think that that is just a huge issue that we have as a society, is that we treat incarcerated people as a number. And maybe we say things like inmate or criminal or felon, and it removes the humanity from the person that we're working from. And so many of the people that I work with share about how they feel like their humanity is lost in the eyes of society, and by the system that's incarcerating them. And so when we take the value of a person and put it down to a number, it's really hard to think about, how can I serve this person? How can I work with this person, right? Because we're talking about a person. We're not talking about a number. And so if we can start to shift in thinking about that person as a whole person rather than the crime that they committed, it can be really helpful in us kind of moving past that barrier of inhumanity, and all of that. And I think the other thing to think about is just that for incarcerated folks, their sense of self-worth, their sense of self in general, often is really put to a test. And I think that if, as advocates, we can really be there for somebody in a way that we can't for many, many other people. And so it's actually a really wonderful opportunity to be able to work with folks who are incarcerated. Sometimes a shift in our language can be really helpful. Which is why you'll see kind of throughout this presentation and other things that JDI and NSVRC does, we've really tried to stay away from using the language of inmate. And we talk about a person who is incarcerated, a survivor who's incarcerated, right? So really just shifting our language can help shift how we perceive and how we talk about different populations of people in a way that is more uplifting of their humanity. And I think also just thinking about all the barriers it takes to get inside of an institution to provide these services. It can be really intimidating, it can be scary, but there are so many things that we can do to serve incarcerated people, to serve incarcerated men. And we're going to talk throughout the rest of today's presentation about kind of what you can do, some individual things that you can think about, but also at the end, I know Carla is going to share some resources that both JDI and NSVRC has. So if this is something you're feeling really excited about as you watch this webinar, we encourage you to check those resources out to figure out how to get some more services set up for incarcerated people.
Thank you so much, Chris. I wanted to share our framework for this project. We have had this project since 2016. So at this point, it's almost 10 years old. And we really took a step back when we started thinking about how we serve men and what the goal of our project is. And this is our framework. So we know that there are stereotypes and social norms that prevent men from seeking services at rape crisis centers. And the issue is that hurts everybody. You know, these societal norms help very few folks. It keeps systems in play, but it doesn't really benefit either people who are oppressed or are the oppressor. So it's important to sort of think that through and recognize that as the reality. And while we know that oftentimes research shows that the majority of people who perpetrate sexual violence are men, we also know that men are survivors of sexual violence. And because those things are true, they have no correlation, to be honest. Sexual violence programs serve survivors, and serving men is absolutely part of the work that they do. It's not a special consideration or something to process and think. It is something to process and think through so you can best serve male survivors, those who are incarcerated and not. But it is part of the work that these programs do every day and should do every day. So it's important to kind of keep that framework and think about that as you do your work. So now I'm going to share with you some statistics about how prevalent sexual violence for men is. And this is through a range of ages. Our primary research is from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention's National Intimate Partner in Sexual Violence Survey. We call it NSVRC for short. And we know, and NSVRC has shown repeatedly through many years of research in different states and nationwide, that 1 in 4 men experience contact sexual violence. It is 25%. So it's important to really process that and think through how many men that is in your life. And oftentimes, if you work at a rape crisis program or a dual program, you may be doing prevention programs with men in your communities. And just wanted to stress that if you are, like Men Can Stop Rape, et cetera, bystander programs, when you're looking out at your audience, recognize that 25% may have experienced sexual violence. So we do encourage you to speak about your services for survivors and really normalize that men can also be survivors of sexual violence, because you are likely speaking to male survivors in all of the programs that you're doing as well. And then another piece from NSVRC from 2018, about half of men who survived sexual assault reported experiencing their first victimization before the age of 18. So this goes back to what Chris was saying earlier about men experiencing sexual violence throughout the lifespan. You may be working with men who experienced victimization as a child and then were re-victimized as an adult, or you may be working with a man who experienced sexual violence as a child, and then something later in their life brought up that trauma again. And so they're dealing with that response. And then finally, from the organization Stop Street Harassment, they found 43% of men reported experiencing some form of sexual harassment and or abuse in their lifetime. So it's a very large number. Almost half of men have experienced some form of sexual harassment or assault. So these are not numbers that we talk about frequently, but they're important to know and understand. And I think we're starting to really talk about men as survivors, and men are starting to feel hopefully more comfortable coming forward as survivors. And we're part of that solution to make sure men feel welcome to receive services at our programs.
Thank you, Carla. Yeah, and I think the first time that I heard the 1 in 4 statistic, I think that really was just, it really blew me away, because I think as a society, that's not something we talk about. We do not talk about men experiencing sexual violence, and to know that the rates of sexual violence for men is very, very similar to the rates of sexual violence for women. I think that was very surprising to me, even though that I work in this field, right? And I think it's surprising for a lot of people. And when we turn to thinking about detention-specific statistics, it's really helpful for us to know what those kind of general statistics are, and to kind of funnel them even further into thinking about, okay, if someone's incarcerated, what does that look like? Who's incarcerated? What's happening behind bars, and that sort of thing. And so I think when we're thinking about who is in detention, how many people are in detention, there's almost 2 million people who are incarcerated at any given time in the United States. And the reality is that the overwhelming majority of people in prison and in jail are men. A man has a 9% chance, or a 1 in 11 chance of his lifetime of going to prison, whereas a woman only has a 1.1% chance, or 1 in 91 chance. So that's a huge disparity there, right? And so when we look up when we look at the makeup of, say, like our federal prison system, 93.4% of people in federal prison are men. That is almost the entire population of our prison system. Mass incarceration has deeply impacted men, and in particular, men of color. Poverty plays a central role in mass incarceration, and people in prison and jail are disproportionately poor compared to the overall US population. Poverty is not only a predictor of incarceration, it's also frequently the outcome of incarceration, as a criminal record and time spent in prison or in jail can destroy someone's wealth, which creates debt and initiates or perpetuates cycles of homelessness, and honestly can decimate their job opportunities. So it's no surprise that folks who face the greatest rates of poverty are dramatically overrepresented in the prisons and jails in our nation. And I think the other thing to think about is that while we're seeing many men going into the detention system, we're seeing those really high, really frightening numbers of people in the detention system. We also know that men are going into this system with violence that they suffered in their home and in their community that has never been addressed. And this violence includes physical violence, sexual violence, witnessing caretakers suffer domestic violence or experiencing it themselves, witnessing or being targeted for gang violence and gun violence, sexual abuse during childhood and adulthood. All of those things are incredibly common for folks who are incarcerated. This means that men are bringing a lot of unresolved trauma with them into the detention system. And this violence against them is so normalized that there's almost an expectation that they will experience this violence. And at the same time, that there's this belief that men somehow don't need or don't deserve help, even though they've been through this. And I think that that is something that as a society, we can really work towards shifting our perspective around and thinking about how can we serve men knowing that this is something they've been through, that they've experienced these incredibly high rates of trauma, and that the incarceration is only adding to that violence. When someone does enter detention environment, that trauma and violence does not stop. Unfortunately, most detention environments tend to exacerbate previous trauma and also cause additional traumas. One of the things that I think is important to think about when we're talking about the trauma of detention or just trauma of incarceration is just the detention environment itself and how it negatively can affect someone's sense of agency on their bodily autonomy. That detention environment can cause a person's health, whether that's physically or mentally or both, to significantly decline. And just having an understanding of how the detention environment can affect someone can be really helpful for advocates as they can start to understand maybe what their clients are experiencing and what they're going through. And there's just so much that when someone is detained that they don't have control over. The use of restraints is part of someone's everyday life. Where they go inside of the facility is determined by staff. There's frequent searches of that person's body. They often don't have access to hygiene items. There's very limited medical and mental health services. Oftentimes, staff and other incarcerated people will use demeaning language and treat them in a very derogatory way. And so just kind of all of this compounded, if someone is coming in with that previous trauma that I was just talking about, the likelihood that that trauma is only going to feel worse because of all of these things that they're going to be triggered is very, very high. And so I think this is really important for us to think about how might this affect someone's emotional and mental state. And then I also do want to just take a few moments to talk about sexual abuse that happens behind bars as well. So that trauma, again, that I just mentioned is honestly, it's more than enough on its own. But we also know that incarcerated people face physical and sexual violence when they are detained. According to an estimate by the lead researcher at the Bureau of Justice Statistics, or the BJS, roughly 200,000 people are sexually abused in US prisons and jails every year. So that represents the number of people not the number of incidents. So that 200,000 is referring to a number of people, and many of those people are abused more than once. And so this is really, really a high number. So according to some other surveys of former state incarcerated folks, that is 1 in 10 people said that they experienced sexual abuse in their most recent incarceration in a state prison, local jail, or community confinement facility. This is a lot of people who are supposed to be being watched at every moment, supposed to be in a space where they are protected, and instead they're being sexually abused. So I just think that this is really important for us to know, so that as advocates, we can think about how do we want to support someone who has that prior trauma, who may be being sexually abused while they're detained as well. And just a little bit about kind of who perpetrates this abuse. Abuse for incarcerated people is perpetrated at nearly equal rates by other incarcerated people and by staff. And staff includes correctional officers as well as people that work at the facility, such as volunteers that are going in, or cooks and things like that. And I think that, again, that to me is one of the things to think about, is that staff perpetrate abuse at such high rates. A lot of times people kind of really are only thinking about abuse that's perpetrated by other incarcerated people, but there is no such thing as consensual sex between an incarcerated person and a staff member. A staff member ultimately holds all of that person's livelihood, their life in their hands. They literally have the keys to that person's life. And so there's no way to not have a power differential there. So there's no time in which a staff member can have consensual sex with an incarcerated person, which again, I think really can kind of help highlight some of the dynamics of sexual abuse that happen behind bars. And I think knowing the numbers is really important to give us a sense of the scope of the issue of sexual abuse in detention, but it's also so vital to share about survivors. And I just want to share this quote from Frank, who is a longtime member of JDI Survivor Council. Frank survived sexual abuse and sexual harassment from a staff member at a LA County jail. And he shared, "If I had an advocate, it would have saved me so much grief. It would have helped me through that traumatic event immensely. Going through it alone, I didn't know who I could trust and who I could talk to about it, which appeared to be nobody." And I hope that his story, his quote, can show you kind of the impact that an advocate that you can have on working with a survivor who's incarcerated, and just how important how we respond to someone and how we face them, how we talk to them, how we show up for them can really make a difference for somebody. The reason this can also make such a difference is that most of the time when men disclose abuse, they hear over and over again that they are the one to blame and they are completely dismissed. Just like Carla was talking about in the beginning about some of those stereotypes about men and about survivors that are men, this happens a lot when men disclose sexual abuse, which is, I think, part of the reason why a lot of statistics show that men do not disclose abuse until much, much later in life. And so when a man does decide to say, "This is what happened to me," it's so important that we think about how we're responding. And I just want to, I don't necessarily want to read all of these quotes because they're quite terrible. But JDI receives thousands of letters from incarcerated people who have been sexually abused in detention every year. And these are just some of the very real responses that these survivors received when they disclosed the sexual abuse, from people saying, like, "How did you let yourself into that situation?" to, "You're snitching, you shouldn't be saying this. Why are you making this up? I can't hang out with a punk," things like that. And I think it's just no surprise that sexual abuse survivors in detention do not feel like they can report. They do not feel like they can reach out for support. And I think that, again, that's why it's so important that they have people that believe them, that they have people that can be there, support them, and help them. And I think this is where advocates can really play a really incredible role for somebody. And I think just knowing this, knowing the responses people hear and how thinking and starting to think about how can we respond to incarcerated survivors, in particular incarcerated men, is so important. And I think what I want to do now is just highlight this story, this video of Rodney. And Rodney is sharing about his experience behind bars and just the importance of having someone who's there to listen.
I was so angry with myself because I felt like I didn't fight back. I didn't do anything. You can't look in the mirror because you're ashamed of what happened. You're ashamed of what you feel you let happen. I disassociated. The physical pain was not even a comparison to what just had happened to me. There was also a thought of that it's over. It was every time I was thinking that, oh, it's over. This is just the last. Just get over with. My goal was to get out of the entire situation. Already in prison, it's a very emotionally trying thing. Very emotionally trying. You're away from your family, you're away from a lot of things. But this going through prison and being raped is even more isolating. So you can't talk to anyone. In some of the places that I've been, the counselors, and they're not trained for this. They're not trained to understand this. They're trained for pretty much suicide prevention. In the state, I saw a counselor once that wanted to know what my plan was when I left home. So the more focus is getting back out and getting yourself together. So who do you talk to? Initially, I wrote JDI a 13-page letter, and they responded with a lot of information for me. The information let me know, look, there are places to help you in this world, and here are some of them. We are also one from just my first time writing JDI up until today has always been that therapy, just having someone to listen to what I rant about and how I feel about what's going on, what's went on. It isn't your fault. And you're not the only one that happens to, and we understand. Sometimes even so today, I blame myself for this. Sometimes. And so to hear someone constantly tell you, you need that reminder, because if you're dealing with it yourself, you know, I'm a step from the ledge. No one deserves this. No one deserves for their body, their mind, their sexuality. No one deserves that to be ripped from them because they committed a crime.
Just always like to take a moment of silence to just honor the voices of those survivors who are willing to share their story. What a gift. What a gift. Thank you so much, Chris, for sharing that. I know you have more to share, but it's just really powerful to hear the impact that services have for survivors who are incarcerated, men or women, but as we know, it's 95% men. And I think it's important to remember and keep in your mind as an advocate that you are an invaluable resource for incarcerated survivors, for anyone, of course, but for incarcerated survivors who hear quotes like we shared in earlier slides and who unfortunately really have little to no autonomy when living in a correction facility, no choices and no way to control how people treat them or how they are spoken to hear from an advocate who can share hope, kindness, respect, it's invaluable. And so this is another piece of artwork from an anonymous participant at an artwork group that JDI does.
And I think, I hope today that you're able to kind of see all of the trauma that folks face and how important advocates can be. Just like Carla was sharing, like advocates can truly be this incredible resource for survivors behind bars. And I think despite the fact that we know that men make up the majority of people who are incarcerated, we know that a huge number of men behind bars have experienced trauma. We know that a huge number of men behind bars have experienced sexual abuse in detention. The reality is that most trauma-based programming is focused on facilities for women, and men do not have access to this support. But that being said, there are absolutely successful services that are possible to offer to men behind bars, and you and your organization can offer these services. These aren't that different from what you're doing for folks in the community. They're not that different than what you're providing for women. It's just thinking about how to shape them so that they are the best that they can be to serve all survivors, including men behind bars. Rape crisis centers and other advocates can be there to provide core services and services that go beyond the basics. These core services can be things like, hotline calls, letter writing, forensic exam accompaniment, investigatory interview accompaniment. And then once those services are set up and are strong, other support services are possible too, like one-on-one in-person support, advocacy on behalf of survivors, groups, special events. The pie is in the sky. Like there's so many things that we can do for folks behind bars. There's so many fantastic ideas about what people want to be doing to serve survivors behind bars. And I think the main thing that we wanted to share today is that it's possible and that it's needed, that folks behind bars need the support of rape crisis centers. And we hope that, again, that after watching today, you feel invigorated to do this work, that you feel like this work is really important and that these services are possible to set up. And I just want to kind of leave us with a quote. As Matthew, a survivor in South Carolina, shared, "I got myself out of that horrible situation and I started going to therapy. And with the help of two amazing advocates that put so much time to help, I took control of my life again." And I think, again, just the impact that advocates can have on survivors behind bars is not replaceable. And so if this is something that you and your organization is looking to start doing, or you're already doing it and you're looking to augment your services, reach out to us, reach out to NSVRC, reach out to JDI. We want to support you and your organization in doing this work, because setting up the services can be tricky and it can be hard and it can feel daunting, but it is invaluable.
Thank you so much, Chris. And I also, of course, second that. We are available and excited and always willing to help. No matter what the issue is, we can offer some solutions or contact folks or talk you through different ways to access facilities and connect with different people. Perhaps you might use the Prison Rape Elimination Act as a tool to get into a facility, and we can certainly share some resources and understanding about PREA and also about how PREA is interpreted and different best practices others have used. So we have a wealth of resources. This is brought to you today by our Working with Male Survivors of Sexual Violence project. We offer a range of resources. We have trainings such as this one. And we also have tools on our website, trainings on our website, assessments on our websites to determine how you as an advocate and or your program, how ready you are to serve men, and then resources. We have a podcast on working with male survivors, infographics, an online toolkit on how to work with men at your program. So we have just a wide range of resources to meet you where you are to start working with men, including men who are incarcerated in your community. This is our project information and disclaimer. Here are the references that we had shared. And then here is our contact information. Thank you so much, and please keep in touch.